If you create something that solves a meaningful problem for someone, it has value inherently, right? And if you create value, then you'll be able to continue to make money and scale your business. And so I think for me, the main thing is like to remain curious. What are the consistent opportunities and problems that you're solving, and who are you solving them for? And I think that level of curiosity continues to help people evolve in their business, right? It doesn't make you stagnate, and build that trust that helps you continue to sustain your business.
Hello, Profit First entrepreneurs and thought leaders. I am so excited today because we are going to have a conversation that is going to take a bit of courage. And we have a special guest that specializes in this area. His name is Daniel Oppong, and he is the founder of a company called the Courage Collective, which is a DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy firm that really takes a strategic, holistic, and human-centered approach to DEI. He's also the founder of Boundless, which is a platform designed to create access for Black and Brown folks pursuing career opportunities in marketing, consulting, and tech. His background includes entrepreneurship, venture capitalism, tech, education, consulting, as well as work in the nonprofit sector. So please join me in welcoming Daniel Oppong to our platform. Hey, Daniel, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Susanne, how about you?
I am doing really great. It's great to have you on our show today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you. So first of all, you do a very, very important work, right? And even for our entrepreneur listeners that are not, I'm going to say minorities, right? Or people of color, we've all experienced issues with recruiting, and there is never a more important opportunity to be able to attract diverse talent, right? Which we should be doing anyway, no matter what the climate is economically. But, definitely that I don't think it's an option anymore, right? So just stay on your side of the fence. And, I love the fact, first of all, just the title of your company, right? The Courage Collective. Tell me a little bit about that, why you picked that, and about your cause and why this cause was so important to you.
For sure. So I think a couple of things come to mind. When I think about courage and what it means to me personally, I always want to be someone that embodies courage. And I think courage is one of those ideas that's relevant no matter where you're at in life. If you're just starting a business, or if you're, 50 million in revenue, you still have to do things that require courage. And when I think about organizational cultures, I think about the people side of business, and to create a culture where people really feel a sense of belonging, that takes a lot of courage. And so for me, it's both a personal and organizational value that we want to invite people into.
Oh yeah, that is so important. I think about, just my world, and even just now, if you think about the world of the great resignation that's happening right now, people leave. They might not tell you this, but a lot of times the reason why they're leaving is they don't feel seen or heard, right? They feel like they're kind of on the outcast of the inner circle, right? Not usually the money, it's usually how they feel every day when they go into work. And so let's talk about just diversity in the workforce. First of all, let's talk about why it's so important right now and how we can create an environment where everybody feels comfortable and welcome.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I would say about the importance of diversity, if we think about the way that demographics are shifting in the world, right? That just the different types of people that are coming to work, we're talking race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, across the board. We have the most diversity of background and identity that we've ever had in the workplace. And I love this quote. One of the clients that we work with, Jason Rosario, he said, as demographics are shifting in the world, no brand can say they have a growth strategy if they don't have a multicultural strategy to go along with it. If we think about the way that cultures are growing, we have to think about who is included in those cultures and in those spaces. So for me, creating culture of belonging is central to growth. And that's part of the reason why it's extremely important. And to your point, yeah, there's real data that supports the idea that when people don't feel a sense of belonging, they leave. And when they do, 50% increase in job performance, fewer sick days. There are things that actually drive business performance when people feel a sense of belonging.
Definitely. It's easier to get that all in team spirit when people feel like they're part of a team, right?
Right.
Definitely with that. So tell me, why do people feel like they're not part of the team? Like, what behavior is triggering this type of reaction? Because, obviously it's not a one-off thing. It's a systemic type of thing. So let's talk about what might be the underlying causes or things that we don't realize that's happening.
Yeah, I think true inclusion shows up in big and small ways, and it can start before someone even gets to the company. So if I go to an organization's website, Do I see core values that represent my core values? Do I see people who look like me in positions of leadership? Do I see inclusive language, for example? All of these things are part of the experience that someone has before they even work at a company. Now, once you get to the company, there are very specific inclusive practices, right? And so making sure that people have a growth trajectory and a growth path, making sure that the managers are really showing up to support the employees. Think about things like employee resource groups. So when I worked in tech, that was a pretty meaningful experience for me. I was one of 5 Black folks at a company of 300 people, global company. And the resource group was one area where I felt really a sense of belonging. So I think it's in part recruiting, but it can really be embedded across the whole employee experience. And I think part of the reason it goes wrong is because companies aren't thinking about it holistically. They're only looking at acute points, recruiting, and then maybe a training here and there. But our point of view is it has to be embedded across the whole employee lifecycle to really be integrated.
So tell me, what are some things that companies can do to create that sense of belonging within not just the recruiting, right? Because you spend all this money recruiting and someone
Right.
doesn't stay, you just wasted a lot of money, right?
Right.
So how do we fill that middle gap of now that we've got this great talent, how do we keep this talent?
Yeah, when I think about underrepresented groups specifically, one of the things that we see often is that they don't have a clear promotion or growth trajectory. And so their long-term opportunity at the organization, they don't feel that potential, right? And so one of the meaningful things that organizations can do is to make sure that they have a growth path for the employees. That's one thing specifically. I mentioned employee resource groups earlier as well. So employee resource groups or affinity groups, those are things that really go a long way. I think the manager one-to-ones and check-ins, those are also pretty significant. And then I think also just the company being transparent about where they are in their process and journey, right? Being able to articulate what they value and making sure that the employees, they're connecting with that as well. So those are a few things that come to mind for me.
I'm curious, I'm just even thinking about my time in the corporate world, right? Starting off, I know a lot of companies would tout, we do non-discrimination policy, we believe in DEI, but obviously, the work, right, wasn't there. It was more like, this is a sticker that we put on our bumper or our website,
Yep.
and it meant nothing, right? So let's talk about how do you make these things be effective? We talked about having the manager one-on-ones. How do we make this person really feel seen and heard? What do we need to do from a conversation standpoint, from even movement standpoint?
Yeah, a couple of tactics that we use when we work with organizations, and we've worked with Fortune 500s all the way down to 10-person startups. A couple of things that we do, listening sessions. So that's one that we employ. Often I would recommend doing surveys, and a lot of companies do like employee experience or employee engagement surveys, but facilitate the survey, ask people what their experience is, and then actually measure what are the things that we can address? And then you tell the people you heard them, and then you respond accordingly, right? So I think one of the things, every company does surveys, I think, but where a lot of companies drop the ball is they don't actually respond proactively to the themes that they heard from employees. And so, if I'm someone from an underrepresented group and I've said, hey, this is my experience, these are some of the challenges that I'm facing, and the company never engages or proactively responds, it erodes trust. And so when we're thinking about the bigger picture of employee engagement, even retention, right? Because retention's a major cost. If you're turning over 20, 30% of your workforce year over year, that's a major cost to a business, right? So retention, we're thinking about, I want to ask you how you're feeling, what your experience is like, tell you I heard you, and take meaningful steps to drive change and make it, improve it, right? That's the idea.
When I worked at Anderson many, many moons ago in the Chicago office, one of the things that they did that I thought was really neat was, and they didn't do this with everybody, it was more so the diversity candidates that were coming in, that they were starting, is they assigned a mentor. And usually it was somebody that was a person of color, that was much higher up the ladder with them. And sometimes it wasn't. I remember I had a senior that was assigned to me who later on became a manager. And, and I also had another mentor who was the head of the entire financial service division at Arthur Andersen in Chicago, which was huge, which gave me a lot of opportunities to go to New York and get hedge fund training as a second year, which a lot of people don't see. But it was really about not just having a mentor, but someone that took a vested interest, meaning that, my first day, do you want to go to lunch? Okay, I'll go to lunch. How are you doing? Bringing me on his different jobs, right? His different projects and assignments, and really making sure that, I got experiences that were pretty much experiences that other people that were at my level weren't getting. With the head of financial services, having those one-on-one meetings, where do you see your career going? And really having access to a different level of access. And all those things added up to retention and feeling like I belonged and even faster progression.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think about my own career and I can echo your sentiment. The first job I got in venture capital, the only reason I even applied was because there was a Black man who was a co-founder of the venture capital fund. And he put me in a position to have experiences that I probably never would have had outside of that gig. We worked in healthcare VC, right? So I got to go to the meetings, was part of the team whenever we were thinking about the fundraising strategy, was working with all the founders. We would invest in 15 to 20 companies a year. We would go to these multi-billion-dollar hospital systems and just think about our unique position. And I just think about how valuable it was for me to see someone who looked like me in that space. Definitely created a level of awareness and helped me just adapt and orient. And so I can't underscore how important that is, just access to mentorship and mentors who create opportunities for others.
Exactly. It's not just the one-on-one lunch. It's about the opportunities and the championship too, right?
Yep.
This person's doing really well, promote them, right? And fight for their salary. I like to think of a company like Anderson. They didn't just have the bumper sticker, we believe in diversity. It was a buy-in, right? It was a buy-in from all the partners. This is what we're going to do. This is, how we're going to build our staff, and we're going to make sure that, it's reflective of the population. And, there's people that don't think it's fair, right? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the other side of people that says, are you giving special attention to some people? Let's talk about that side. How do we address that side?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the lack of fairness or the perceived lack of fairness can be a barrier, but I think we have to zoom out and think about it more systemically, right? And so when I say systemically, we're thinking about access to opportunity. So for me, for example, I got an opportunity in venture capital largely because someone looked like me worked in the space. My dad's an academic. I had never heard of venture capital, tech, etc. It wasn't that I didn't have the skills. It was that I didn't have access to those types of opportunities. So when we think about people who maybe come from generational wealth, or even who don't, but have maybe a different inroad to specific positions, part of what we talk about with equity is just leveling the playing field and making sure that other people have access. I don't want to be tokenized. We're not talking about just handing out free opportunities. The person has to demonstrate the competencies that are aligned with the role that they're going to be doing. But I think part of the barrier oftentimes is the lack of access and lack of exposure, not the lack of talent and lack of skill. So for me, equity just says, hey, let's level the playing field and make sure that we're creating points of access for people who don't have it. And to me, that's fair. That's fairness, right? That's what I would consider. And when we look at the just composition of the workforce, who is overrepresented and who is underrepresented, that tells a story in and of itself. And so that's another thing that I would want to consider when we're thinking about fairness. Let's just create points of access to give people opportunities to have these meaningful experiences that can transform their career like I did.
Exactly. And, and I think about it, even going back to that career opportunity, the career I had at Anderson, not everybody got it. Not everybody that was a person of color got that level of opportunity and access. They all got the mentors. We all got the mentors, but this was the head of financial services, this is the guy that signed the audited reports for Bank One. Okay. So this is huge. Yeah. And it was also about, like you said, it was not just identifying a diversity candidate, but someone that had the potential to be partner level and mentoring and grooming that. So, and that becomes a question, right? Because a lot of times, I hear the excuse, we can't find a qualified diversity candidate, and we are meeting our quotas, or just happen to be in the mailroom. Yeah. Not the accountants, not the engineers, or in the mailroom. So let's talk about finding or creating, right? Maybe the word is creating qualified diversity candidates. Mm-hmm. What programs need to be in place, right? Because like you said earlier, not everybody has that exposure. Not everybody has that opportunity to be able to walk into an Anderson, right? So how do we create that candidate?
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts come to mind. We actually just got off of a training with a large organization. They have a team that is specifically focused on early engagement for historically underrepresented folks. Large financial institution, right? And so they have a team specifically that is designed to cultivate those pipelines at the early career. We're talking first year of school all the way through their college experience into like once they graduate. And so they're talking to first year students who maybe have never even heard of this organization or have never heard of an opportunity to be a CPA or to work in financial services. And they're starting to build the awareness. And so that's where it starts for a lot of folks. We have to engage at an early career level, because part of the reason maybe they don't have opportunities is lack of exposure, lack of opportunity just to get that on their radar. So if we start at the early career, that's one thing that is really, really meaningful. And what I love about this specific organization, they have recruiters who walk alongside this early career candidate all the way through their 4 years at school. They focus on the relationship building aspect, not just the transaction. And so when we think about relational over transactional, that goes a long way in cultivating a pipeline of these folks to try to find opportunities at your organization. So that's one of the first things that I would say, like cultivate a program to where you're engaging at the early stage. And then once you do that, that actually can help develop your pipeline.
I love that. You know, one of my first internships in college, and I stayed there for about a few years, was Procter and Gamble.
Okay.
And, you know, I actually joined them my freshman year. And I remember the first week there, they sent us to what we call P&G college. So it was like learning how to use Microsoft Word, Excel. But imagine, I mean, this is like early 90s, getting that exposure, you know, and just coming out, you know, people were like just trying to figure out computers at that point.
Right.
And, you know, having gone to P&G college, learning how to deal with business etiquette. Like we don't come to work wearing jeans. You know, we learned to wear suits. I think that's where I got in the habit of wearing suits, was Procter and Gamble. But again, it was starting early so that there was an excuse by the time we graduated that there were not candidates, because they were building their pipeline throughout. So
correct.
Very important from that standpoint. And even as a small business, right, we can develop an internship program, you know.
Totally.
And again, it's just like Daniel said, it's your commitment, right? It's the commitment to ending the systemic problems, right? The systemic wealth gap that's happening versus pool of candidates. And if you start them earlier, they're going to be better, right? And hire them cheap when they're interns, right?
That's right.
And they can do great work. So, you know, that's definitely a way of dealing with that and doing that. I love that. That is a really, really great idea. So for companies that, first of all, are interested in implementing a DEI program, right?
Sure.
Where do we start? Where do they start with implementing a DEI program?
Yeah. The first thing, to your point, you mentioned, it has to be a commitment, right? And not just in words, but in action. And I think one of the things that we've seen recently when we think about the current economic conditions, a lot of companies committed in 2020, but have not kept the same energy going forward. And as they've cut specific positions, they have also cut DEI roles. So one of the encouragements would be a commitment and a core value is true no matter the season, right? And so that's where we would start. And then I think practically, one of the main things that we do is we just ask people about their experience at the company. So we'll facilitate an inclusion and belonging survey. And so organizations can do that. Then what are the themes that we get from that survey, and how can we action against those themes? I think DEI strategies miss the mark when they just launch into action, but they never take the time to ask people about their experience first. So if you ask people about their experience, then we can cultivate a meaningful strategy to support that experience. And we always encourage more of a, let's call it crawl, walk, run approach, because you can't do everything all at once. Maybe we want to paint a bigger picture of like where we hope to and aspire to go. But what is one thing that we can implement? Maybe it's an employee resource group, or maybe we want to make more equitable hiring practices, or we want to reevaluate our compensation strategy. What is something that I can do to move the needle to ensure that we're creating a more equitable environment? And then as you start to stack those wins together, you can see sustained change. It's interesting because growth looks different for everyone, right? So we have some companies who are doing it at level 10, and then some people who are still in their infancy, and that's okay. It's more important to start with a commitment and then take an intentional action along the way. So that's what I would encourage people to do. Commit to it, allocate resources to it. First step, ask the people what they're experiencing, probably hire an expert to help guide you through the journey.
I love it. Very, very good thoughts on that. And I don't force anything down anyone's throat.
Sure.
But let's talk about the people that are choosing not to, the businesses that are choosing not to implement a DEI culture. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about what happens. What's the consequences? What's the future of that?
Yeah, in my opinion, right? Again, we talked about if demographics are shifting in the world and you're trying to think about your growth strategy, both from an employee base, but then also your consumer base, you're not going to be relevant to a diversified body of consumers. And you're not going to be able to attract talent that come from underrepresented groups. And we think about just what different perspectives bring to the table. So I think the cost or the potential consequence is as the world shifts, you're not going to be able to really engage the changing world. There's a quote that I love that goes something like, in times of change, the learners inherit the earth, while the learned find themselves beautifully prepared for a world that no longer exists. So if you're a company and you're not keeping up with the times, then you're not going to be prepared for the world as it evolves. And so that to me is the major risk. You have to be able to keep up as the world changes.
I love that. You definitely don't want to be left behind,
Right.
You don't want to be the one that's using paper and pencil and everyone else is using a computer.
That's right.
So definitely you got to get on it. And even if you're in a small town, I interned one summer, it was my last internship with a company called Cargill. And it was in this teeny weeny town called Ottumwa, Iowa. And I think it had 60,000 people in the entire town. It was smaller than my college, Ohio State University. Okay. Everybody knew everybody's name at the local Walmart,
Yeah.
And, I remember when I first moved there, and I hope this is not offensive to anybody out here, but I was a little bit afraid, even though I was here for the summer, I was like, I am going to be the only person of color in this entire town. It was one other guy I ran into over the summer. And it was interesting because they treated me so amazing when I was there. I mean, first of all, the town people were really nice. My coworkers, they invited me to go out with them and whatever events that they had and their lunches, very inviting. But even in a small town, they managed to attract somebody that was from this really huge university, Ohio State University, to come all the way to Ottumwa, Iowa. Of course, they paid a premium, because they were really interested. But, there are ways of breaking barriers and inviting people in and making them feel welcome. There's no excuses in this century for you to feel like the only people that you have are the ones that look like you.
Totally. I mean, we think about the access people have just through digital means, right? And so I've done some early career recruiting, just distributing your job requisitions on all these different job boards all over the country. There are opportunities for people to engage. And if a company is intentional, they really can bring in people from all over. I grew up in the Dallas area. I ended up going to graduate school in Washington State, right? And then moved to Nashville, never been there. And so my career has kind of been all over. And I think people are willing to do that for the right opportunities. So you took that risk for yourself and it turned out to be a really meaningful one, right? So I think part of it is creating the opportunity and then inviting people in, like you said.
Definitely. I learned a whole lot about commodities dealings and
sure,
corn and everything else. Yeah. So very, very interesting experience from that standpoint. So Daniel, one of the things I like to ask our guests is, if you could leave our guests with one piece of advice, it can be personal, it can be business, what would that piece of advice be?
I think about entrepreneurship through the lens of solving problems. And so if you create something that solves a meaningful problem for someone, it has value inherently, right? And if you create value, then you'll be able to continue to make money and scale your business. And so I think for me, the main thing is to remain curious. What are the consistent opportunities and problems that you're solving and who are you solving them for? And I think that level of curiosity continues to help people evolve in their business, right? It doesn't make you stagnate. And so some of the people that I like working with are the people that are willing to rethink and reimagine the way that they're approaching their work. And so that would be my piece, remain curious and think about how you can create value and continue to solve problems for your customers and build that trust that helps you continue to sustain your business.
I love that. That is really good advice. And don't just stop there. Teach your people to think that same
That's
way.
Right.
What are the problems and how do we solve them? And have that entire team be a group of problem solvers, right? So we're all creating value for each other as well as upward to our clients, right?
That's right.
And I think about just terms of DEI, right? You have the opportunity to really impact somebody's life, right?
Sure.
No matter what color, creed, or sexual orientation they are, you have an amazing opportunity to really impact someone's life. And just like you wouldn't hold back with your child and teaching them, that's how we have to look at our employees. We're molding them and teaching them, especially if we're recruiting straight out of college or straight out of high school. There's that opportunity. These are our values. This is how we think. This is how we problem solve. This is how we look for more problems. And regardless of who they are, their background, you can still train them in your values and your philosophy.
That's right. 100%. Said it well.
So Daniel, how do we find you? How do we learn more about you? How do we find you to implement DEI programs?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, thecouragecollective.co, and then we also have a LinkedIn page, and so you can just look us up, The Courage Collective. And so those are probably the two primary ways to get in touch.
Thank you, Daniel. It was great learning from you and sharing your wisdom with our audience.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.